I was deployed in Iraq. We were going to get some little girls that had been burned. They hit our vehicle, and I ended up messing up my ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, and got a traumatic brain injury. I think that the fact that I was such a disaster after being injured and getting out of the military, I can show other veterans that you can get better. We started a nonprofit called HeroAg. We bring veterans with traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and other problems in and help them to manage their problems through agriculture. We don't really talk about regenerative agriculture on your first visit, but yeah, we're going to talk about it before it's over with.
So, Mike, what did you do when you started your service in the Army?
You know, I always wanted to be a medic in the military ever since I was a little kid. Growing up, you know, I thought that's what I was going to do. When I was in high school, my best friend ended up killing himself and kind of threw me into that little tailspin of trying to figure life out, you know. At 15, I started lifeguarding, and I'd met the EMS director because he taught our CPR class. And so after that, it progressed and progressed. Ended up in a mentorship program through the high school. So I went the last period of the day over to Murray EMS and spent the day on the ambulance with those guys. For my 16th birthday, I got to run my first call, and I was hooked at that point, you know. Went to EMT school, graduated from there. Mom and Dad said if I'd go get a degree in anything, that when I got out, if I'd take the degree to the EMS director, he'd give me a job. I went and blistered through a degree at Dalton College and got an associate and went to the EMS director, said I was ready for my job. He said because I wasn't 21, they wouldn't hire me to drive their $88,000 ambulance because insurance wouldn't cover me. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Army, and they put me on a $14 million Black Hawk.
And how old were you when you joined the Army?
Right before I was 20.
Okay. And what were those years like, the first few years in the Army? And did you re-enlist directly after, or was there a break in service?
I started out, went to basic, AIT, airborne school, all that, and then went to Germany. Spent a little more than 3 years in Germany. Came home, went to Fort Bragg, and then at that point I decided, when my enlistment was coming up, I decided I would get out and go home, you know. Went home, and now because I was over 18 or over 21 and miraculously a mature adult, they'd hire me to be on that $88,000 ambulance. So I started on the ambulance, but it was just a very difficult adjustment for me. I had about 2 months there, and then they were getting ready to stand up a new medevac unit in Georgia. And so I came back into the National Guard, and then eventually would progress from being just regular National Guard to AGR, where I was in the Guard full-time as a job.
And where were you? This was pre-Global War on Terror, right?
Yeah, that was before 9/11. And then I was in during 9/11. After 9/11, it just kind of solidified my commitment to both my country and to the greater good of, you know, doing something worthwhile.
Okay.
And so I continued my military career until 2009. I was deployed in Iraq. We were going to get some little girls that had been burned. They hit our vehicle, and I ended up messing up my ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, and got a traumatic brain injury. And that would be followed by about 3.5 years of in and out of the hospital and infections and surgery and all kinds of things.
So that was before a major emphasis on TBI and mental health and kind of that subject?
It was. A lot of times I kind of joke, and I was like, I was one of those TBI guys before TBI was cool, you know.
Can you all just explain TBI for the
Okay.
folks who don't know TBI?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So, you know, traumatic brain injury, I suffered a traumatic brain injury when they hit our vehicle. My head hit the front window, and I ended up damaging the frontal lobe and the occipital lobe. I suffer from a condition called PTVS, which is post-traumatic vision syndrome. It's where the optic nerve goes into the occipital lobe. It causes the walls to kind of slope and the floors to to be kind of like in the shower, kind of uneven. And so if you imagine walking, putting your foot down, thinking the floor's there, and it's not there, it's difficult. And so I was fortunate that a neuro-ophthalmologist was able to give me some adaptive glasses that tries to straighten some of that up. There's a tremendous number of veterans who are coming back from combat who have suffered a traumatic brain injury of some type.
Because those traumatic brain injuries, they don't necessarily come from blunt, impact. It could be depressurization or rapid pressurization of the cabin. It could be
Yes.
a very serious case of whiplash.
Yes.
And sometimes they can go undetected. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that the NFL has really done a lot to raise awareness about traumatic brain injuries, it's pushed all the way down to the elementary school kids on the football field, taking a hard lick and then possibly being evaluated for a potential of a traumatic brain injury.
And the side effects or the symptoms of a TBI, they often overlap with those of PTSD and can be misunderstood. Is that right?
They do, and there's things that we've done, our family has done to help me to adapt to it. But it's things like expressive aphasia, where it's difficulty in saying the words and remembering the words. It's difficulty in planning. It's difficulty in sequencing tasks. It's impulse control. So when depression, anxiety, lots of things can be attributed to both PTSD and traumatic brain injuries.
Right, and I can speak of having incurred my own brain injury in 2013. And coming out to the farm and just speaking with other veterans, it's there's almost a cultural understanding between the veterans that it makes it where I can be very self-aware if I stutter, stammer, forget what I was, the conversation I was literally just having, or trying to find a very simple word. There is something reassuring about being with other veterans and them understanding kind of what that struggle is like. And I feel, I can speak for myself, I feel a lot less self-conscious because I feel understood, and I don't feel like I don't feel broken. I just feel like you said, this is how I do things now. Mm-hmm. So
you became an officer. I guess you commissioned as a lieutenant.
Right.
And then how long were you in the service for?
So I got out in 2021. But right after commissioning, 5 days after graduating, I went to Fort Benning, now called Fort Moore, and went through the infantry officer basic course. I got an assignment to the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart there in Georgia, and was almost immediately deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom 20. We were doing the Village Stability Operation mission set at the time, so our battalion and my company was dispersed across the southeast region of Afghanistan, and I had the honor of leading. Our platoons were broken up, so I was with a section of soldiers that were extremely qualified, and we were there essentially as a support element for the Special Operations Operational Detachment Alpha. And I was only in country for a month when I got hit by a rocket on a village, a mission where we had cordoned a village called Aachen. The rocket blast hit about 3 feet to my left and shattered most of the bones in my left hand and severed the tendon, and then cut my right hand in half. And I got some shrapnel to the face, leg, neck, and bicep. And then I was just very fortunate to have probably maybe up there with you, the best medic in the Army. Was able to extract me from the back of the vehicle and provide immediate care. As I was positioning myself prior to being extracted, I was shot in the leg by small arms fire. I didn't notice it just because the adrenaline was pumping so hard. And then upon exfil, another rocket hit just a few feet away from our vehicle, and that's what incurred the TBI, ruptured both of my eardrums. and the prognosis was that I wouldn't be able to run again. I would need a cane to assist with walking. I was going to start learning how to write with my left hand. I was right-handed and needed reconstructive surgeries on both hands, but the prognosis was my left would become my dominant. And I was just very fortunate to have a strong support network through North Georgia. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, as soon as she found out I was injured, she drove to the hospital and she went to the reception and asked, where's Lieutenant Brady? They wouldn't tell her because we weren't related, so she slept in the parking lot and called a close friend of mine, who then called the hospital and said she was a general secretary, which she wasn't. Oh, well, he's in room 618. So my wife, she came up and, you can imagine when you're in a wheelchair and you can't use either hand, the kind of, you can't feed yourself, can't brush your teeth, So that was, to have someone that I knew and was and loved and was comfortable with to help me, just helped out immensely, rather than the graciousness of or the virtue of strangers, right? She just, anytime that I felt like it was a little too much to take on, she just reminded me what I was capable of. So as soon as I could, we were walking around doing loops in the hospital corridor. I was discharged, but still had about 2 years of scar tissue releases, follow-up surgeries. And I didn't want to get discharged from active duty, so I was doing everything I could to fight the medical evaluation board. And my unit, I was fortunate that they let me stay in the operations cell through the duration of my recovery, just kind of to prove something. I don't know if it was to myself or the medical officers. About 6 months after I got shot in the leg, I ran a marathon, which was a very stupid decision, but I'm glad I did it. I was able to stay on active duty and recover. Was able to be a company executive officer for a Bradley company, or mechanized infantry company.
Right.
And then we deployed in support of regionally aligned forces. So the company went to Estonia. We did some operations in Germany. We did that for 2 3-month rotations in Europe. And then I was asked to be I say asked, I was given the unique pleasure of being the battalion logistics officer. That was, that task was awarded to me. So we get to go back to East Europe, and from Germany, moved equipment to Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And so just to be back with soldiers, and while it wasn't kinetic, it was still operational, and we were still helping people. With the threat that was on their eastern border, it was very significant. And then following my time with the 3rd Infantry Division, I transferred into military intelligence and took company command in Pensacola, Florida for the signals intelligence, cryptologic intelligence, and cyber intelligence course. About that time, that had been 7 years since I got injured, and the scars, the arthritis, those issues started to set in, and it was just time to separate from the Army. So the medical evaluation process started, and then COVID hit. So that impacted my transition plan. And it also changed the medical separation. It was about a 6-month process that turned into 15 months. So just kind of sitting there in isolation, waiting for my next purpose. It started to weigh on me pretty heavily. My wife and I relocated near her family in Metro Atlanta and Marietta. I was kind of waiting for the universe to figure it out for me, and realize that you just got to take action for yourself. Unlike the Army, where they cut you orders and tell you where you're going to go, or they give you 3 choices of what your next job is. I had to make that grown-up decision for myself. So I pursued an opportunity and accepted a Wounded Warrior Congressional Fellowship Program in the Georgia 6th, and that's how we met through through veteran service organizations.
I was very fortunate that I had a wife who was very engaged. A lot of our community really rallied behind to ensure that I got the treatment and the best of the best. I remember at one point I was doing home health. It was after a hospitalization. I said home health was the best that I could find at that point, but it's kind of like trying to train for the Ironman with a stationary bike, a treadmill, and a bathtub.
Yeah.
And so I was able to eventually get to Shepherd Center, and Bernie Marcus funds a program there. He's the founder of Home Depot, and he started funding a program there for veterans to go to Shepherd Center called the Shepherd Share Program. and it's an intensive TBI PTSD program.
And that's in the metro Atlanta area?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Can you kind of go through your mindset from start to when things started to click to finish?
In the beginning, I was there for over 13 months with them, and it's kind of like I showed up, and that mentality of make sure you stay safe was my entire mindset. And so at the end of the 2-week evaluation they did, I hadn't talked. It was like I was that alcoholic uncle that thinks that maybe if you just give me one more week, then I can get my problem under control. And fortunately, they were able to kind of show me that I needed some help.
Okay.
And that would be followed by a very intensive program. There were only 20, I believe, of us that were in that program, and we had about the equal number of clinicians that were there, treating us. And so it was very intensive, 8 hours a day, every day. And it was at that point I finally decided I had to get better. I had just come out of a hospital stay, and my wife came into the bedroom and she dumped a load of laundry on the bed, and I was just laying there. And she said if I wasn't going to do anything else, the least I could do is fold the laundry. And I think that was probably one of the biggest turning points in when I decided to be the veteran that had the brain injury versus the veteran who was not defined by his injury.
Had you separated from the military at this point?
I had. I was medically retired in 2011, and I'm a 100% disabled veteran.
Post-military in 2011, what was your experience like trying to find your next job or sense of purpose post-military?
I kind of went home after I'd gotten pretty much stabilized by Shepherd Center, and I'd been there about 5 days, and my wife came to me and said, she said, I don't care where you go in the morning, but you're going to get up and go somewhere. And so I went back to the fire department, and I knew those guys there, and those guys, I walked in the door and I told them, I said, I'm a fireman who can't fight fire. I'm a paramedic that can't treat patients. But if I keep sitting at home, I'm going to put a bullet in my head. And those guys said, well, we'll find you something to do. And so I gradually just began to progress through more and more responsibilities that was appropriate for the level of mentation that I had at that time. Eventually, I would kind of outgrow that. I went to my preacher one Sunday, and I said, I don't have a purpose. I realized that I would never get to be a paramedic or a fireman again. And I was tired of watching the guys go out the door without me. And so I went to my preacher and I said, hey, I need something to do. I need a purpose. And he said, I'll see you in the morning. After that, Eddie Brannon started to teach me to farm. I began learning, and we always joked about who's the one person that's more important to know than a realtor when you're looking for land, and everybody knows that it's the funeral director. So it became a piece of land that was available and a gentleman no longer needed. and so we ended up purchasing that piece of property. We started farming on it. We had to redo all the fences. We had to redo all the barns and everything. And I found that gradually I had found a purpose. I'd found what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And then other veterans started showing up.
To kind of go back to when you started with the Shepherd Center, can you talk about your capabilities and your mindset when you were first admitted and versus when you were discharged?
I showed up at Shepherd Center and I was in a wheelchair and talking 13 words a minute. So that was pretty messed up, dude.
Yeah.
I was not a good husband. I was not a good father, and there was a list much longer of what I couldn't do than what I could do. Shepherd taught me how to compensate and adapt for that. Nowadays, I tend to give people nicknames because they are what they are to me. You were a captain, you'll always be the captain, even though you're my friend. I know I can't remember your name every time, but that's just a part of it. And so I've learned just to not really care if I have to remember things differently than other people do. I've decided that this is who I am, and I will live like this, and be okay with it.
So you kind of had to develop an adaptive mindset, and Shepherd Center helped you rethink the way you encounter obstacles that maybe weren't there before?
Absolutely. And I also had a tremendous community behind me from both the fire service, emergency services, the guys on the ambulance and stuff, and the law enforcement community all really held me incredibly accountable to do the right thing, and to get out of bed every day. Those guys all said, we don't care where you go, just go somewhere. We don't care what you do, but just do something. And had that community not surrounded me and really had it gave me no option but to be successful. That was probably the biggest part of it for me.
If you could go back and say something to Mike Reynolds 3 days before you rolled into the Shepherd Center program, what would you tell yourself?
I was an incredibly angry person. I had been in the military's healthcare program for years at that point. I had transitioned to the VA and was just mad. And I think that probably the most eye-opening part of it for me was when I realized that everybody's got their family doctor. When I was in Iraq, I was a medic, and I was a good medic. There's a lot of guys that are alive today because of the things that we're doing on the battlefield that potentially would not have survived Vietnam, World War II, World War I, things like that. We can either overwhelm the system at the VA, or we can overwhelm the system at Arlington National Cemetery. And as soon as I figured out that the VA was not a bad system, it was just an overwhelmed system, that I think enabled me to not be quite so angry.
Since you were 15, you kind of had this calling to watch over people as a lifeguard and then help people as an EMT. And then you certainly took that to the extreme in the military. How do you find yourself fulfilling that calling now?
Eventually, in 2020, we started a nonprofit called HeroAg. We bring veterans with traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and other problems in, help them to manage their problems through agriculture. Having been there, it makes it easier for me to understand a little bit better about what a lot of these veterans are going through. We had a veteran showed up at the house. He'd been there a couple of months. And at that point, my daughter was 14, and she came to me and she said, "Dad, James does a lot of the things that you do." And I was like, "Nah, James is just goofy." And she's like, "No." She says, "He's got a TBI." And when your 14-year-old daughter recognizes a veteran as having a TBI, it's kind of sobering, So a couple of days later, I called James, and he came to the farm, and I told him, I said, "As long as it's not immoral or illegal, I want you to do anything I ask you to do for the next hour." And so he goes up and he gets the wheelbarrow, brings the wheelbarrow down to the house. And I was like, "Go get your jacket off the back of the chair, bring it out." He puts it in the wheelbarrow. I was like, "Go get your pocket knife out of the door of the truck, bring it back, put it in the wheelbarrow. Go get your gloves out of the tractor, bring it back, put it in the wheelbarrow. Go get your headphones out of the barn, bring it back, put it in the wheelbarrow." And he sits there, and before it's over with, after an hour and a half of doing this wheelbarrow is just mounded up with all of James's stuff. And I looked at him and I was like, "If you want some help for that," I was like, "I know the place to get it." And I walked away. And sure enough, James comes comes right on my heels, man. He's like, hold up, tell me more about getting this place, this place that I can get some help. And a couple of months later, he's sitting at Shepherd Center for a 3.5 month stint, receiving treatment for TBI. I think that is a different way of helping veterans. We joke about the fact that if I can no longer save them, on the battlefield, maybe I'll try to do it in a cornfield.
Yeah.
Veterans come to us who are in crisis, and we try to connect them to the resources that they need to get better. And then some veterans just have a farming problem. They don't know where to get fence posts. They don't know how to put up a fence. They don't know how to engineer their barn so that it won't blow over, with the first gust of wind. And so we help those veterans to do that. And then we have veterans who come to us that are like, hey, I want to be a farmer. And we're like, well, what kind of farmer? And they're like, well, I watched 7 episodes of Yellowstone. I want to be a cattle farmer. And we take them up there and we let them do a little bit of cattle farming. And they're like, cows are awful big. And I'm like, well, goats are smaller, chickens are smaller.
Right.
Find that thing that suits you, You don't want to get up and feed a cow every day or feed a goat every day, then that's fine. Go get something that doesn't breathe, Try hydroponics, try aquaponics, try, hoop house, greenhouse, try something that doesn't breathe. Veterans will show up at the farm having not been touched for years. And it's amazing to watch a veteran who's incredibly intoxicated show up at the farm and sit down in the goat pasture, and the goats start to lick the sweat off of his skin. And you realize that's the first time that veteran has had something touch him in that way. And you can just watch the stress just flow out of the veteran. And I think that's a unique way of trying to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Replacing unhealthy coping mechanisms with positive ones.
Absolutely.
How do you kind of coach and mentor these veterans and help them find a new purpose or an additional purpose to help them with their mental health?
I think that the fact that I was such a disaster after being injured and getting out of the military, I can show other veterans that you can get better. It is possible. I used to have nightmares every night. I used to have all of these problems. And now it's a little bit different because, I don't sleep but a couple of hours a night. But when I lay down, I'm tired. And when I'm tired, I go to sleep. I think every person's brain can process so many thoughts a minute. And if my brain is consumed with the hydraulic pressure and the fuel gauge and the fuel temperature and the engine temperature and the PTO speed, and if I'm going in a straight line and all of this kind of stuff, then there's really not a lot of room left in my brain for those things that I saw in combat and the things I did in combat. And I think that is that's a good place to be at. It has become a family thing. There's a lot of guys that will show up there and they take instruction from my 11-year-old son a whole lot faster than they'll take it from a type A male, They show up and they're cussing or whatever they're doing at lunch or wherever we're at, Home Depot or wherever. And if I say, hey, quit cussing, now it's kind of me against them, But if my 11-year-old looks at him, he's like, hey, I'm only 11. The guy's kind of like, yeah, I'm a jerk. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of trying to find a different way to fix those problems. I don't necessarily think that we have the ultimate way. I just think that we have a way. And that's kind of the best way we know how. And we're constantly learning.
And since you officially started Hero Agriculture, what's your support network? How's it grown, and can you describe that now in the state and also out of the state of Georgia?
Yes, we have veterans. Got veterans in Oregon, Texas, North, South Carolina, New York, Florida, Georgia. We're in the process right now. We're building a 13,000 square foot veteran facility. We've received some help from Home Depot, Mohawk, Tunnels to Towers, some large organizations like that, and some private donors to complete that facility there on the farm. We had a veteran showed up to the farm a few months back. He pulled down the driveway, and I met him on the driveway. Walked out there, and in the passenger seat he had an airsoft gun that he had painted the barrel on, and he had a glove that he had put Velcro on the glove and Velcro on the handle of the airsoft gun. And I walked out there to the car, and he's like, "Is this Hero Agriculture?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "I was fixing to go feed some cows. You want to go?" I was like, "Just lock your car up here." And so he gets out of the car, and we walk up there, and we feed cows and pigs and goats, and we do a bunch of just busy work for about 2 hours. And then I looked at him and asked him, I said, "What's the plan?" And he said he'd been standing in front of the mirror for 3 days trying to kill himself and couldn't do it. And so he'd watched some YouTube, TikTok, whatever videos, and he saw that the officers were trained to shoot till you drop the gun. And he was headed to the interstate, and he was going to get on the interstate, and he was going to go as fast as he could down the interstate until somebody stopped him. And when somebody stopped him, he was going to pull to the median and step out. And when the officer stepped out of the vehicle, he was going to step out with the gun and hope that officer took his life. I think that the thing that just really resonated with me from that was the fact that, he had it planned out so much. He's like, "I'm going to pull to the median because when the officer shoots me, I don't want to fall into the lane of traffic and then have to shut down a lane to do an investigation." And you're like, that is such a small piece of that whole tragedy. And so we sat there and we farmed for a couple of hours together. When it was over with, he left, and when he left, he turned out of the farm, and he didn't go toward the interstate. He went back toward home. We have a restaurant there in town, kind of a small town, and a lot of the law enforcement guys eat there at that restaurant. And we never really ask permission. We always just go and sit with them. And the reason we sit with them is because we want to personalize that relationship. For the veteran who doesn't want to shoot himself and wants to get somebody else to do it, we want that veteran to understand that Sean, any number of them, pick which one, Chad or whoever, that if they have to shoot them, that is a life-altering experience for them, and they just want to get them help.
And what kind of feedback have you gotten from veterans that have gone through your program, and their family members?
I think the feedback's been good. It's been astonishing the number of veterans who come back to help us. We met several years ago. You came to the farm, you kind of got a little taste of farming, but then you kind of looked at what you were good at, and now you've taken that part that you were good at and you've brought that back to our organization, and you've helped us better that piece. And I think that regardless of veterans' ability or disability, every veteran that touches Hero Agriculture makes Hero Agriculture a better organization. We say a mission gives you purpose, purpose gives you hope, and hope gives you tomorrow. And I don't think we would be able to find that mission and that purpose and that hope if it was not for the other veterans who have been in the program, who have come up there and decided they can help make us more successful. It's amazing our ability to both feed off of each other and to navigate a world where we both have found disabilities. Hank sat there this morning and his sleeve was unbuttoned, and I knew his hand wouldn't let him button it, and I knew it bothered him, because a lot of times when he can't get them to button, he'll roll them up. But I know that here he just wanted his shirt to be right. And he sits there, and I turn around and I lean over to him and I was like, stick it under the table. And he sticks his shirt sleeve under the table, and I buttoned his shirt sleeve for him. And it was like, that's what he needed at that moment. But at the same time, I had to be somewhere today, and I'd given a talk at the conference, and so everybody always comes up to you after you talk at the conference, and they're doing all this stuff, and it turns around and he comes over and he's like, your stuff's behind you, because he'd gone and got my stuff together because I'd forgotten about it. And then he's like, hey, we got to be somewhere in 5 minutes, and he's sitting there just frantically writing down these people's names because he knows that I won't remember them and can't track them. And when I get back home, it's like, well, who is that person and who is that person? And he'll remember it and I won't. And just knowing that he's standing there 3 feet behind me, and when the guy walks up and shakes your hand and says, hey, my name's Gary Matterson. I'm the vice president of new and beginning farmers for
Credit Bureau.
Yeah, farm credit, and he says that to you, and you're like, I know when I get an email a week from now and it says Gary Matterson, and I'm like, which guy was that? And he's like, oh, that was the freaking old crusty dude with the beard, and I'm like, oh yeah, and so whether it's me buttoning his button for him or him remembering somebody's name for me, it's like together we can take over the world, dude, because
well, it comes back to that principle that you probably learned it as working with the first responders, or you learned it on the farm, and that, again, find yourself a way to be useful. And if you see someone else turning a wrench or sweeping the floor or getting the ambulance ready, doing the pre-rollout checks, and you don't have anything to do, then you go help them, or you find something to do. And it's, you're constantly scanning, and I see you do it to look for a way to be helpful, and you see me struggling with a button on my sleeve, and it sticks with you. And as far as being a soldier goes, that's the fundamental is,
get your stuff right and then go find somebody else that needs help and help them.
Right.
It is not a difficult thing to do. A lot of people would freak out, I'm sure, on our brochures and all the stuff that we put out. Down at the bottom, that's my cell phone number. And I don't think a lot of people would put their cell phone number on that type of document. I want everybody to know that their life is important enough to me, and that if they need help, they should not hesitate to call my cell phone. There's no push 1 for this person or 0 for help or leave a message or any of that kind of stuff. You call me, and unless I'm on the phone, I'll answer the phone.
And I've seen the farm and enjoy going there, and I brought my 5-year-old son for Camden to ride on the tractor. But you've taken a lot of consideration on resources, support, and accessibility for veterans with all types of injuries that they may have incurred during the service. Can you talk about those considerations and community resources that you've implemented and are implementing?
Yes. We joke about it and we say if you can complete a 12-page application, you're probably not a candidate for our program. We try to keep it simple, and a lot of veterans who have experienced a traumatic brain injury, it will affect a portion of their brain called their hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus regulates your body's temperature, and so with that, we try to have a large 100 by 100 pavilion for us to teach under. Mm-hmm. And so that way, when that temperature goes up in the day, we've got a place to put that veteran that can quickly overheat in an area where he doesn't have to stop learning. We found that a lot of times veterans have a hard time taking classes and getting information and tracking that information. We found the Retired Teachers Association to be incredibly instrumental. Teachers have traditionally been lifelong learners, so we can call those teachers up and say, hey, you know, I'm looking for a 2nd grade through 6th grade retired teacher with a special education certificate. We can take that teacher, put that teacher in the classroom with a veteran for an egg candling class or for a artificial insemination class. Lots of veterans are good at different things. If you have the veteran that knows plumbing, then when he comes to the farm to help us plumb a project or whatever, we try to bring in 4, 6, 8 other veterans, and so that guy teaches everybody. A lot of times it's the little wins, you know. And so the guy comes in the door, and my son teaches him how to drive the tractor. But at the end of the day, he goes home and he's like, hey, I did something today. I learned something. You know, it's hard to think about combat when you got an 11-year-old sitting beside you barking orders about how everything you do is wrong.
Right.
So a lot of times, I think our veterans come in at that ground level, and it's just, let me just raise 3 goats and survive with those 3 goats. But then as time goes, they come back to us and they're like, well, what's regenerative agriculture? You know, what's rotational grazing? What could I do with all of this cow manure and used hay? And you're like, well, that's browns and greens, and you put those together and we make compost and things like that. I think regenerative agriculture, it's the next level, whether it be regenerative cattle farming or crops or, you know, livestock or whatever it is. It's just that next level, because we think it's important for the veterans in our program to constantly be learning and constantly making improvements, and that's the easiest way to do it. We don't really talk about regenerative agriculture on your first visit, but we're going to talk about it before it's over with.
It's so much easier to help a veteran in distress than it is to admit that you've got, you know, that I
You've
have
got a problem.
Yeah, that I struggle with overreacting. That my body, when I'm on traffic in Metro Atlanta, and I get to the office and I've got my fight or flight has kicked in and my armpits are sweating like I'm getting ready to run a marathon, because my body associates traffic with a threat. You know, you got to admit, okay, that, you know, my body's keyed up. I'm in a safe environment. Let's calm, you know, walk ourselves back. And there's been times where I'd call Mike and say, hey, everything's okay. I'm just kind of panicking right now, kind of having
just a little worked up.
I just need someone to talk to. You know, I know I'm not going crazy, and this is my rational thought, but this is what my body's trying to tell me. And you know,
I always tell him, I'm like, sir, you were a captain. Everybody knows you don't work.
Yeah, that's fair. When I came to HeroAg for the first time, you know, if you close your eyes on the farm, it sounds like you're in a motor pool. So in that sense, I felt like I was back in the Army. But then, having grown up on a farm, there's smells of the burning diesel, of the kicked up dust, you know, from the loose soil. There's just smells and sights that you can only know if you've been on a farm. So between feeling like I was reconnected with where I grew up and reconnected where I found the greatest sense of purpose in the military, it really turbocharged my batteries quite a bit. And talk about your son, Camden. Something that still stands with me is, you know, I think he was 9 or 10 at the time. And you know, your background as an EMT and working with veterans, he's very much in tune with the culture of first responders and veterans. So he's no stranger to ask me about what they did to my hands. And when I explained to him that, you know, in my right hand, while it's disfigured, they were able to take this bone, fuse it here, and salvage a finger.
Right.
Instead of him kind of being, you know, offering his pity or feeling sorry for me, he's like, that's really cool. And so that mindset of, yeah, you're right, that is really cool. They were able to fix my hand. It's not fully functional, but it's there. Just hearing that from him and that being his first reaction just kind of reminded me that to approach things with gratitude And instead of being, those days where I'm trying to turn a wrench or trying to do something technical or mechanical with my hands, and I bump my finger, I can't quite get it right, and I have to change my posture, rather than feeling sorry for myself about what happened and how my hands are, is think about Camden, like, you know what, I still got them, and they can still function, so.
I'll tell you, there's nothing that he enjoys more than a high 4 from Captain Hank.
Well, he's the only one. Well, there are a few authorized to give me a high 4, and he's certainly one of them.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
You guys, this has been one of the most amazing times I've had as a filmmaker. Usually I'm asking all the questions. I'm so glad you came. The questions you asked are so perfect, and then your questions as well. Did getting on a farm heal you?
Yes. Yeah. It no pun intended. It brought me back to my roots, and I'm the youngest of 17 grandkids from my grandfather and grandmother's farm that we grew up on. My oldest cousin, who now runs the farm, he did all the manual labor of cutting tin that was wrapped around the 3,000 some odd pecan trees. And so by the time here I am, 15, 20 years younger than the oldest cousins, I found my job was to start out pulling weeds in my Nana's garden, between the vegetable garden and her flower garden. And that taught me a work ethic. I mean, she had bifocals that Ben Franklin issued her, but she could still spot a weed from half an acre away. So it taught me, do it right the first time, do it as efficiently as possible, and then I can go play. And then I got a little bit older, and I was able to move the big limbs that got down from thunderstorms or hurricanes, and that kind of became my job. Find a way to be useful was kind of a work ethic that was also instilled in me. And it carried with me through high school, through college, and I think it helped me be very successful as a junior officer. And then, but coming back to the farm, it just kind of reawakened those principles. And then Mike's commitment to just selfless service and helping, especially the veteran community. He helps way more than veterans, and I'll let you elaborate on that in a moment. But yeah, it certainly reawakened a sense of self-esteem. That I was capable of doing things again, or reminding myself I'm capable of more. And it's kind of driven me to push myself a little bit more. Sometimes it's a mantra of, whether you have a very debilitating, at one point, TBI, or if you have reconstructive surgeries and you're limited on your mobility, to have an adaptive mindset and just to think, it's not I can't do this anymore. There's a second part to that phrase, and it's I can't do this anymore like that. So, and that's something that I try to share that insight, and it certainly kind of goes unspoken between the two of us. So yeah, it's definitely helped me greatly. And again, just bringing my son, he's really only kind of been brought up as a city boy, in the suburbs of Atlanta, but for him to see, kind of get a taste of what I grew up on is just great. And to know that I'm a phone call and an hour drive away from being able to bring my son up there, or we'll go fishing together, that's something I'm extremely grateful for. For farmers, and not necessarily veteran farmers, but for farmers that might be interested in helping, and the business owners, what kind of mentorship and what kind of, if a farmer wants to help, how can they do that?
We like to say the 80-80 rule. We know 80% about 80%. So there's a lot of people that are a whole lot better out there that have been doing it a whole lot longer than we have. And so you find those seasoned farmers, and they are a tremendous asset to us, just to know that they're out there and they're available. And if we have a veteran that's in their area, or if they would come, to us, like I said, we're building a veteran center, and we'll have a place for them to teach and help others. And also at the same time, we're a nonprofit. We're a certified 501c3. It costs money to run our organization. I'm very proud of the fact that my wife and I have done a lot. I'm not paid to run Hero Agriculture. I've got a incredible group of individuals, of volunteers, that do a lot to help us. And eventually we're going to have to grow that capacity, and we're going to have to hire some staff. You know, that's going to take some funding and some support to be able to do that. And so we're always looking for people that can kind of look at our organization and say, you know, well, I'm better served just making a donation, or somebody that says, well, hey, I know a whole lot about pasture poultry, or I know a whole lot about pecan farms, you know, or I know a whole lot about remembering people's names at conferences. And we like to put those people into the place where they can really, really prosper and help us.